Hi students, I'm glad to meet you all once again through this video. After the introduction of your 9th standard books yesterday, today I'm here to start the chapter from Beehive textbook. The first chapter is The Fun They Had. This is written by Isaac Asimov. Before I start the chapter, I would like to tell you a short introduction of this writer. So here I've written a few points about the writer and a few things about what the chapter is going to consist of. Okay. So this writer, Isaac Asimov, was born in Russia. He was brought up in America and he studied to be a professor of biochemistry. He was variedly interested in writing. So he took up fictional story writing, science fictional story writing. He started writing many short stories and he has written more than 500 books. Many of his writings were adapted to be made into movies. One of the most popular movies in the recent times that was adapted from his book was I, Robo. If you have seen, you would know that this movie was enacted by Will Smith. Alright, so about the lesson now, the fun they had. This story is a short story, a science fictional story written by this person named Isaac Asimov, and he has taken up this story to be happening in future. Children, do you remember last year during your 8th standard, the first chapter you studied, The Best Christmas Present in the World? The main character of the chapter was Jim McPherson, who had written a letter, and the letter takes the story back to around 70-80 years. But on the contrary, the first chapter of your 9th standards book is going to take you 150 years ahead in future. This is a futuristic chapter. As we are in the year 2020 now, we are going to see from this chapter that this story is going to take place in the year 2157. Okay, so I'll just introduce to you the characters of this chapter. All right. This chapter, what we are going to study through our NCERT book, was first published in a newspaper in the year 1951 in America. Later on in the year 1954, the same was printed in a science fictional magazine and it became very popular, and in the year 2017-18 NCERT took this story to be a part of the English chapter for you students. Alright, let's begin with this story. Trying to keep the video short, I'm going to give you an introduction of the characters and summarize the story in short. Later on I'll tell you what you have to do with this chapter. So this story contains 4 characters whom we are going to see in some instances. The main character of this chapter is a girl named Margie. Margie or Margie, it's pronounced both ways. So we'll keep it as Margie. So Margie is an 11 years old girl who, along with her friend Tommy, was discussing about how their schools are. And they come across a book which was found in Tommy's house, which says how the schools were in the past for them, but the present for us. Like how we are in school, how you people come to school, the same way everything was described in that book. So when Tommy tells Margie about this book, she recollects her grandfather mentioning about schools like that. Her grandfather had told her that his grandfather, Margie's grandfather's grandfather, used to study in a setup of schools that is mentioned through this book. Margie and Tommy take a look at this book. Margie gets more interested in reading this book, but Tommy doesn't take so much interest to go through this book. So when it's about time for them to go to their classes, Margie tells Tommy that I would like to keep this book and go through it and know more about how the schools in the past were. So Margie's mother calls her saying that it's time for your school. Can you imagine what type of school they were in? The room which was near their bedrooms was set up to be a classroom. And what were the equipments they had in their classroom? Not the blackboards or the smart boards like what we have. There was not a teacher standing in front of students like you teaching the concepts, but it was a mechanical teacher, a computerized teacher. So the voice will come through the computer will be their teacher. So keeping the computer as their teacher, the way they studied was different. They didn't use notebooks and pencils like we do, but they had to do everything in the computer. All the writing work was typed and submitted into prescribed slots. They were given regular homeworks, regular tests, and everything had its own slots for being submitted. And the mechanical teacher, being very fast, would immediately analyze and give them the results and whatever corrections were to be done. So once what happens, Margie's mechanical teacher was giving her some trouble. Her geography sector in the mechanical teaching was giving her some trouble because it was going much faster than what was prescribed for her age. So her mother, Mrs. Jones, calls for the county inspector, who comes to their house and repairs the mechanical teacher, makes whatever correction was needed so that the mechanical teacher functions exactly the same way which is needed for Margie to learn. It was not based on class system like what we have. In future, according to this chapter, it is depending on the age and the level that they learned, their syllabus is designed. So Margie was an 11-year-old girl. So the county inspector comes and repairs the mechanical teacher and sets it up in such a way that it is appropriate for her to learn. And then later on, when Margie starts learning through the computer, she gets into the thoughts of how the previous schools were. She gets into a comparison of how the olden schools were and the schools in the future where Margie is studying. So with those thoughts, Margie concludes, towards the conclusion of this chapter, Margie gets into the thought that probably the children in the olden schools, that is our school style, she feels that the students then would have had a lot of fun. They would have gone to school together. They would have sat in a classroom with other students. They would have actually interacted with a human teacher. So all these things makes her think